The house was too quiet the moment I stepped through the door. No sound of cartoons spilling from the living room, no clatter of dishes in the kitchen, no little feet racing toward me shouting, "Daddy's home!" For a second, I thought maybe they had all gone out, but then I saw it. A folded piece of paper lying in the middle of the counter, written in her handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, and the words inside cut deeper than any blade. I need to find myself. Marriage and kids are suffocating. I read it again, slower this time, as if the meaning would somehow change. My chest tightened, my throat closing up around the silence of the house. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was abandonment dressed up as self-discovery. She didn't say she needed a break. She didn't say she'd be back. The note was final, like she had planned this escape long before she ever picked up the pen. My name is Aaron. I'm 36, and in that moment, I realized the life I thought I had built wasn't mine anymore. Every memory of us, the wedding, the promises, the late nights with crying babies, flashed through my mind, and each one felt like a lie. I thought we were okay. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing worth walking out on your husband and children for. I sat at the table with the note still crumpled in my fist, the silence pressing down like a weight on my chest. My thoughts raced, questions clawing at me. Was this burnout? Was she drowning in stress and just didn't know how to say it? Or was it something darker? A betrayal she couldn't bring herself to admit out loud? The kitchen felt colder, emptier, as if her absence had stolen the warmth from the walls. And as I sat there in that stillness, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of a bad day. This was the beginning of something I never saw coming. The longer I sat with that note, the more the past months began to replay in my head like a film I hadn't paid close enough attention to the first time. Suddenly, the small details I brushed off didn't seem so small anymore. Her sudden obsession with me time, those endless hours at the gym or at coffee shops where she insisted she needed space, felt less like self-care and more like rehearsals for an escape. I thought she was just trying to balance the weight of work, motherhood, and life. I never imagined those breaks were her way of breaking from us. There had been the late nights too, creeping in more often than not. "Deadlines," she'd say, with a sigh, dropping her bag on the counter. But the deadlines never added up. And when I asked gently, just wanting to know when she'd be home, she would snap, eyes rolling, voice sharp, like my questions were nails scratching at her skin. The woman who once laughed at my dumb jokes now bristled at the sound of my voice. She started missing family moments that used to mean everything to her. Our daughter's school play, a cousin's wedding, even Sunday dinners, she once claimed, were sacred. Always another reason, always an explanation I forced myself to accept, because I believed she was overwhelmed, not unwilling. I wanted to think she was tired of the responsibilities, not tired of us. She said more than once that motherhood drained her, and I chalked it up to exhaustion. But now I wondered if those words weren't a cry for help. They were a warning I ignored. The bitterness in her tone had grown sharper too. I remembered nights when she'd look at me across the table, her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name, and say I was too comfortable. At the time, I thought she meant financially, career-wise. I had given up chasing a promotion, to stay closer to home, to make sure we had stability and the kids never felt neglected. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now, looking back, it felt like every sacrifice I made only deepened her resentment. I unfolded the note again, smoothing the wrinkles with trembling hands, staring at her words until they blurred. I need to find myself. Marriage and kids are suffocating. It didn't say she needed time. It didn't say she'd be back once she figured things out. The ink was clear, permanent. She wasn't coming back. She was gone. The next morning was the hardest. My son tugged at my sleeve, his small voice breaking the silence I couldn't fill. "Where's Mommy?" My daughter echoed him, eyes wide, and searching, like I had the answer tucked in my pocket. I forced a smile, swallowing the lump in my throat, and told them Mommy needed some time away. But how do you explain abandonment to children who still believe in bedtime stories? Routine shattered instantly. I burned toast, forgot lunchboxes, rushed drop-offs at school with hair uncombed and shirts mismatched. Work calls piled up unanswered, while I scrambled between emails and diapers, pretending like I was holding everything together when really I was crumbling. Every corner of the house reminded me of her: the perfume on a scarf, the empty space in the closet, the photo frames, filled with smiles that now felt staged. At night, after the kids finally fell asleep, I broke. I'd sit at the edge of the bed, her side cold and empty, and replay her vows in my head. For better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. Words that once made me believe in forever now mocked me, hollow echoes of promises she'd already erased. I had thought we were building a family worth protecting together, but I was the only one still guarding the walls. I tried to hide my pain from the kids, plastering on a steady face during the day. But inside, humiliation gnawed at me. The woman I loved had chosen to walk away, leaving me to explain her absence to the two people who needed her most. Every time they asked when she was coming back, my chest tightened with a truth I couldn't bear to say out loud. Her words came back to me in flashes, accusations she'd thrown at me when things started unraveling. "You're too comfortable," she'd said once, like being steady for our family was a weakness. At the time, I thought she was just frustrated, trapped in the grind of routine. But now those words stung differently. Maybe she had already decided she was done. Maybe I had been blind to the escape route she was drawing all along. One night, desperate for answers, I sat at the desk where she used to work and opened her laptop. My pulse hammered as the screen lit up, a strange mix of guilt and dread weighing on me. She hadn't even logged out of her email, and what I found hidden there made my stomach drop. The emails unfolded like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. At first I skimmed them, thinking maybe they were work-related, some project she hadn't told me about, but the more I read, the colder my blood ran. Reservations for hotel rooms, made under her maiden name. Receipts for dinners charged to a card I didn't know she had. And then the messages, casual, intimate exchanges with a coworker she'd mentioned in passing once or twice. "Can't wait for our getaway. Finally, just us." My vision blurred as I scrolled, the words twisting into knives. She hadn't just left because she felt suffocated. She left because she had somewhere else to be, someone else to be with. The note on the counter, dressed in self-discovery and soul-searching, was nothing more than camouflage for betrayal. While I was juggling the kids, holding our family together, she was planning weekends in hotel rooms and crafting a future that didn't include us. I sat there, with my hands trembling, on the keyboard, the sound of the kids playing in the living room cutting through my haze like cruel irony. Their laughter should have been a comfort, but in that moment, it only deepened the ache. How could she abandon them? How could she choose escape and desire over the two little souls who needed her the most? Over me, the man who had stood beside her through every storm. The walls of the house seemed to press in around me. I couldn't cry, not with the kids just a few feet away. I couldn't scream, though every nerve in my body demanded release. Instead, I sat in silence, the weight of the truth crushing down on me until I could barely breathe. She said she needed to find herself. But that night, I found her, in someone else's arms. The days blurred together after that discovery, each one weighed down by a numbness I couldn't shake. Nights stretched longer than they should have, hours spent staring at the ceiling, mind racing with questions that had no answers. Sleep only came in fragments, broken by jolts of panic about the future. how I would raise 2 kids alone, how I would keep the house running, how I would explain to them why the woman who promised forever had vanished without a trace. Every morning I pulled myself out of bed, not for me, but for them. The heartbreak was a constant ache, but I couldn't let it spill over into their lives. They still needed breakfast, school runs, bedtime stories. They still needed a parent who showed up, even if half of me was missing. I pushed through the exhaustion, forced myself to smile when their eyes searched mine for reassurance. They didn't deserve the weight of her choices pressing down on them too. Friends and family stepped in where they could. Meals dropped off at the door, offers to babysit, words of encouragement whispered when they thought I might break. Their support kept me from collapsing completely, but it also made her absence stand out like a flashing sign. Every empty chair at dinner, every holiday without her, every time someone asked about her whereabouts, it became harder to pretend she was just away finding herself. She wasn't lost. She had left. In the quiet moments, my mind traced back through our years together, picking up patterns I had ignored before. Her anger always sharpened when she was hiding something. Every defensive word, every time she accused me of being too comfortable or too demanding, now looked like smoke from a fire I hadn't realized was burning. She had been laying the groundwork for escape long before she ever picked up that pen. Love has a way of becoming a prison when betrayal lingers. Even though she was gone, her choices trapped me in invisible chains. I replayed her words, her excuses, her laughter that no longer belonged to me, until the walls of this house felt like bars closing in. One evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, my daughter looked up with wide, hopeful eyes. "Is Mommy coming back?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. My son echoed her question, waiting for the reassurance only I could give. But the truth lodged in my throat. I wanted to say yes, to promise them everything would return to the way it was. Instead, I just sat there in silence, staring at their faces, knowing I had no answer to give. It was months before I saw her again. The kids were at school when she showed up, knocking lightly as if she were a guest instead of the woman who had once lived here. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, eyes darting across the house as though checking what had changed, what no longer belonged to her. A suitcase in hand, she said she was only there to collect some clothes, but her tone hinted at more. She wanted to talk. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where her note had shattered everything. She looked thinner, restless, her fingers drumming against the wood. "I couldn't breathe," she began, her voice edged with defensiveness. "You and the kids. It was too much. Always needing me, always pulling me in different directions. I lost myself here." I listened quietly, her words heavy with rehearsed justification. She wanted to make herself the victim, to frame her leaving as some noble act of survival. But I had lived with the wreckage of her choices too long to be fooled. When she finally paused, waiting for sympathy, I leaned forward and spoke evenly. "I know about the hotel bookings, the emails, the getaway with your coworker." Her face cracked instantly, the mask slipping in ways she couldn't control. The color drained from her cheeks, her mouth opening and closing as though the excuses were trapped on her tongue. "That's not... You don't understand. It wasn't what it looked like." But the words tumbled out broken, weak, each, one more desperate than the last. I didn't raise my voice, didn't shout the betrayal back into her face. Instead, I let the truth sit between us, my tone calm but unshakable. "You didn't leave because you couldn't breathe. You left because you found someone else, and you thought I would never know." Her eyes flickered, shame battling defiance, her breath shallow as if the walls were closing in. Finally, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard from her, she whispered the words that confirmed everything. "You were never supposed to find out." The truth didn't just unravel her story, it unraveled her entire life. Word spread quickly, as it always does in families and tight circles. The co-worker who had once been so eager to whisk her away suddenly wanted nothing to do with her once the whispers began. He vanished quietly, leaving her with nothing but unanswered messages and the humiliation of knowing she had been disposable. Friends and family, who had once admired her ambition and independence, now looked at her with something closer to contempt. Conversations grew clipped, invitations stopped arriving, and the judgments became impossible to ignore. No one wanted to be aligned with the woman who had walked out on her husband and children under the guise of finding herself. She had gambled her reputation, and now she stood with nothing to cash in. At first, she came at me with anger, lashing out in texts and calls. "You made me look like a monster," she accused, her voice sharp, desperate to shift the weight of her choices onto me. But anger doesn't last forever when there's no one left to believe the story. It broke down, softened into sobs, until one day she stood on my doorstep with tears streaking her face, her voice trembling. "Please," she whispered, clutching her hands together. "Please don't turn the kids against me. Please don't shut me out." I stood there staring at her, the woman I had once loved so fiercely I thought nothing could break us. Part of me still ached, not for the person standing in front of me, but for the memory of who she used to be. The woman who once dreamed, beside me, who held our babies with tenderness, who swore we'd always be a team. That version of her still haunted me, still whispered that maybe she was in there somewhere. But as she knelt in tears, begging for scraps of the life she had thrown away, I knew the truth. That woman didn't exist anymore. She had been replaced by someone else entirely, someone who chose lies over love, escape over family, and no amount of begging could ever bring the old her back. She once said she needed to find herself. But, in leaving us, she lost everything that truly mattered. I think about that often, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of detached clarity. She chose a path that promised freedom and self-discovery, but all it gave her was isolation. The man she left for abandoned her. Friends turned cold, and her family couldn't look at her without judgment. She was left with an empty apartment, a fractured reputation, and the echo of her own decisions. For me, the revenge wasn't loud or vengeful. It was quiet, steady, built in the everyday choices that shaped a new life for my children and me. I poured myself into them, into creating a home where laughter replaced the silence she left behind. Mornings became lighter as we found our rhythm, evenings warmer as we made our own traditions. I discovered that love doesn't vanish when one person walks away. It transforms, reshaping itself into resilience, into something even stronger. My nights became calmer. No more waiting for footsteps that never came. No more questioning every excuse or fighting through the fog of doubt. My days found purpose in small victories, school projects completed, dinners shared, moments of joy captured in places she could no longer touch. The scars remain, of course. Betrayal leaves its mark, a reminder of how fragile trust can be. But those scars no longer define me. They remind me of what I survived. She, on the other hand, is left staring at the wreckage of her own making. No partner to hold her, no trust to rebuild, no family bond to lean on. She traded everything for the illusion of freedom, and in the end, she is the one trapped, alone with the consequences she can't escape. The day she walked out to find herself was the day I found the strength to live without her.